pass on the
Blog
info.
Talk Radio.
Live from the nation's capital, it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry, with host Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Anthony Ingram. I'd like to welcome you to Quintessential Listening, Poetry. Tonight's very special guest is Lisa Stice. Lisa is a poet, a mother, a military spouse, the author of 2 poetry collections, Permanent Change of Station, Middle West Press 2018, and Uniform, Aldridge Press 2016, and a Pushcart Prize nominee. She volunteers as a mentor with the Veterans Writing Project, as an associate poetry editor with 1932 Quarterly, and as a contributor for the Military Spouse Book Review. You can learn more about her publications, at lisastice.wordpress.com. So that's Lisa Stice, STICE.wordpress.com. Welcome, Lisa.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Ingram.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's great to have you on the show tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Let me ask a question as we start. What sparked your love of poetry?
My goodness. I think that came early on when my mom read to my brother and I every night. And one of my favorite books was Mary Mouth's Book of Nursery Rhymes. And in fact, I memorized it. My mom would read it to me so often that I memorized the book. And I think it was, you know, those nursery rhymes, and then later as I got older, getting into the, you know, things like Shel Silverstein and Arnold Lobel and other children's poets, I started writing my own poetry in kind of 3rd grade. And, you know, it's the kind of the rhyming poetry and more kid kind of poetry. But, and then I just kind of continued to write, but I always kept it kind of to myself. Even through high school, I never really thought that I would be a poet or write poetry as something as like a serious hobby until I was in college in my undergrad, and I took some creative writing courses and a particular poetry course, and that's when I decided I was definitely one day going to be a poet. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's begin this journey. Please share one of your pieces with us.
This is from Uniform, which I wrote before, during, and after my husband's deployment. And our daughter was 6 months old when he left on deployment. And she was a little over a year, or not quite a year old when he came back. He was home in time for her first birthday. So. This one is called Long Distance. When will you be home? I wish I could say, but I can't. 2 weeks between phone calls. I have forgotten your voice. I wish I could say, but I can't use the words that would say it all. I have forgotten your voice, and the baby does not know you. I can't use the words that would say it all. 2 weeks between phone calls, and the baby does not know you. When will you be home?
It's a very powerful piece, Lisa.
Thank you.
Now, based on reading your work, again, it seems as if, and based on your biographical sketch, it seems as if the military part of your existence is extremely important to you. So, what are some of the predominant themes of your work?
I think some of those themes are what keeps the family together in times in which they're apart, so it keeps them emotionally together when they're physically apart.
All right.
The military doesn't just, like my husband's gone quite a bit, and so he's away and misses up, he's never been home for my birthday and the entire time that we've been married. He's always gone at a training or something. So, we miss spending some holidays together and special days. He missed out on, seeing our daughter roll over and crawl, and so there's all of that. But then there's also the other family members because, we don't always, sometimes we get moved away, far away from family. And, it's like now we're currently stationed in North Carolina, and my parents live in Nevada. So we only get to see them a couple times a year. And so, there's those other physical separations of family and it's that figuring out how to keep everybody still emotionally connected when we're not together.
Right. Well, share another piece of your work, please, with us.
I will. This is another one from Uniform. This is another deployment poem. This is before deployment. The night before deployment. I say, I need you to come back, but you were asleep. I think of the flak vest and helmet, jump and dive gear, weighted rucksacks stacked in the living room. I should have faith in the corpsman's vigilance, in sound training, in your drown proofing, in your combat drills. But where was my training? I think of the tasks unfinished, a toy box held together with clamps, sockets without safety plugs, cabinets and drawers free to open. Our daughter will crawl and walk in the months you were gone, and I need to protect her.
Why is poetry important?
I think it's important because poetry comes from deep inside us. It's even if poetry is fictionalized, which these poems aren't in Uniform.
Okay.
I think they still come from a very deep emotional place, and they're more about the emotion than really what is going on in the poem. So all those things that go on in the poem, the purpose is just to bring out those emotions. And so it's connecting at those base levels that everybody, even though somebody might not have gone through a deployment, can maybe relate to the emotions of that time, in a time that maybe they were left unprepared, worried, concerned, and worried that they're not going to be able to do it by themselves.
Well, what I'd like you to do this particular time is to share maybe 3 of your works.
Oh, okay. From, and like I said, my poems from Uniform and my poems from Permanent Changes Station are all true. They're all things that happen. I mean, like in the night before deployment, my husband did leave with a partially completed toy box for our daughter and with all these safety that were in place. My parents came to visit. We were in California, so my parents came to visit, and they helped put up all the safety stuff for me with the power tools and everything. But so here's Permanent Changes Station, which is focused more on the military child than the military spouse, I'd say. But probably, I guess, still has has a bit of me in it, and my own fears and concerns as a parent. But Anyway, this is it for this? Men board armored cruisers. Oops, sorry. Let me begin again. Men board armored cruisers, C-130s, earn salaries, ranks for the protection of chalk hearts, hopscotch squares washed away in rain, sidewalks stained in pastel, boxes of melted crayons, melted a little more inside a moving truck, birthday streamers still rolled up somewhere in a box, under a box, behind a box, locking a door another last time with no goodbyes. A girl in a hotel crib, not her blanket, her dog on guard. Interstates like gray snapshots where we lose our way. And then somehow we knew. Holding out advantages until confirmation, word sent from great distances that would change each day, grow taller and need me less, fall asleep with just a kiss. The order arrived and you followed it, instinct to keep you small, to keep you mine. But even the sharpest weapons grow dull, remain behind, untaken. And this is, on such little things, happiness depends. You say, stop singing, then lean your head on my shoulder. Begin your own lullaby, secret system of your voice like bubbling water, divine manipulation of threads woven through wind and kissed by stars. Secret pieces of news divulged to the night. The black-crowned heron builds his nest out of music by moonlight. Coyotes march from great distances, the doorkeepers and sentries of the dark. Magnolia blossoms, as big as the cold crystal moon, lean down their sweet scent and listen while the moth spreads her brown wings and flies like a shadow, silent through the trees. Night after night, you sing your story to the stars until you drop down exhausted on your bed and your little dog lays down at your feet.
You've written 2 poetry collections, Permanent Change of Station and Uniform. Does knowing that your poems are published and out there in the world validate your being a poet, or are you content knowing that they're out of your system?
I think I'm content knowing that they're out of my system. Because those 2 collections, anyway, like I said, they're very personal experiences of mine and true experiences, and so there's like a catharsis, to kind of get them out. And they came in, I wrote them in difficult times. Uniform was written, around my husband's deployment and during his deployment, and then Permanent Change of Station was also written in a difficult time because it was the first time we had a military move with a child, and she was only 2, so she didn't quite understand it, and it was traumatic for her, and it was traumatic for me because I didn't know how to make her understand what was going on,
Yes.
So they're both very personal books, and so even if they wouldn't have ever come out into the world, I mean, just the fact that I wrote those poems, it's what I needed to do, and it's just a little
poetry?
bonus.
Please continue,
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Oh, and I was just going to say it's a little bonus that they're also out in the world, because I hope that other people can relate to them in some ways and maybe, start conversations with their own spouses or, feel like maybe, they can write out some of the feelings that they're feeling as well.
So there is an uplifting component to your work as well.
I think so. I think that even though there's some moments of fear in my poems, doubt, that in the end there's like this underlying strength in each of them. I think especially in Permanent Change of Station because children are pretty resilient, and my daughter had a difficult time when we first moved here because everything was different. She was so far away from grandparents, and she wasn't seeing all the familiar faces, and even our activities changed because we moved from San Diego to a small town in North Carolina. So, her world became kind of smaller, and we didn't have San Diego Zoo to go to regularly anymore. And but I also, through her experience, got to see her adapt and grow through all of that difficulty. And I saw her, like the strength that she had, and realized that, I was stronger too than I thought I was. And
well, let's take a short break, and we'll be right back with Lisa Stice. My name is Michael Anthony Ingram, and welcome to Quintessential Listening Poetry. Our very special guest tonight is Lisa Stice. The call-in number is 646-787-1631. Lisa, please favor us again.
All right, I will. And you were mentioning that kind of that hopefulness or kind of discussing before the break, and so I think I'll share this little poem, Changing to the Major's Dress Blues. It's not either of my collections, but it's a newer poem that I've written since Permanent Change of Station, and it's kind of about putting, kind of looking ahead and putting all those times of separation and, worry and everything behind. Changing to Major's Dress Blues. This form is different from the last. This one settles the heart. Your thick brocades of gold, age-forgiving cummerbund, more bravado than anything else, are like nearing something. We call it career, spent in training for combat zones and long silences. This is the turning point. For all these memories of pinning ribbons, lining up medals, turning buttons, making certain they're straight, so that one day we will retire them to a bag in a closet next to my evening gowns.
You've talked about your daughter. Would you read, please, while Daddy's at training, our daughter asks questions?
Excuse me?
While Daddy's at training, our daughter asks questions.
I'm sorry, I missed it again.
Okay. Will you read that particular piece?
Which one?
While Daddy's at training, our daughter asks questions.
I'm sorry. My phone was I think there was another call somebody was calling my phone, so it was beeping, so I was missing some of
Okay, all right. It happened to me too, so I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with technical difficulties. We're on the same page. While Daddy's at training, our daughter asks questions. Yes.
Yes. I will read that one.
All right.
While Daddy's at training, our daughter asks questions. I don't know how to explain 35,000 feet. all I can say is it's very high. Yes, far above our house and those trees, but no, not beyond the moon or the stars. And how far are those? But I don't know how to explain that either. When will he be back? So I count the days, point to them on the calendar. What is it like in the sky? I say, I know it's cold and difficult to breathe, but I don't know how to explain 50 below or the partial pressure of oxygen. She pretends to be an airplane. Can I skydive? And I say, when you are much older, but I don't know if I'd want her to. She counts backwards, then jumps her couple inches, and my heart rises before it falls back into place again.
You know, that is exceptionally touching. That touched me. Well, let me ask you a question. How does a poem begin with you, or for you rather, with an idea, a form, or an image? How do you go about creating a poem?
My poetry usually comes from interacting with people. I think that's why so many of my poems are about my daughter, my husband. You know, they're kind of sparked by conversations. And this was, my daughter was asking questions about, my husband was doing was at a high altitude dive school, and he was or a high altitude jump school, and he was jumping from planes at 35,000 feet, and she was and it was just that, it was her questions, and I feel like my daughter has made me a better poet because those interactions with her, I think it's kind of made me kind of pay attention to language in a different way because of the way, you know, her phrasing of words are different than the phrasing of words of an adult, and the types of questions that she asks are different. And so it was that kind of childlike innocence and that just wanting to know how the world works and, you know, wanting to be a part of everything, including the scary parts.
All right. Well, tell us about your process. Is it pen and paper, computer, notebooks? How do you write?
I did used to do a lot of notebooks, but since my daughter came along, it's kind of been less notebook and kind of the paper that's closest to me. It'll be sometimes, you know, we'll be playing and she'll say something, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is the, it's just the idea that she has, the like I said, the way children think is just so interesting to me, and so I'm like, oh, that's such an interesting phrase that she just said. So I'm like, just a second, I need to write what you said down, and so I write it down, and she's actually started to ask me to write down some of the things that she says. So,
oh, really?
so I'll just quickly jot down what she said, and then I'll hold on to that because in the moment, I'm not going to stop playing with her and go, write something out fully. But later that evening, or when she does have like some downtime during the day, when she just kind of wants to go off by herself and have her alone time, then maybe I'll sneak off and kind of develop that interaction that we had into a poem. And sometimes it might not be about that interaction, but it'll make me think of another interaction that we had or something else that we've been talking about. And so I'll kind of weave those two experiences together, or sometimes three experiences together. And so it's a lot of times, just fragments throughout the day on whatever I have available, and then it just kind of depends on my mood, if I want to write it all out on paper or if I want to go straight to the computer, and especially also depends on like how quickly my thoughts are coming out. Sometimes if I have something that I really have set in my head, I can pull it out quicker on the computer for some reason.
You know, we talked earlier about poetry in terms of your beginning, in terms of being a writer. Do you think that you were meant to be a poet?
I think so. I think it's kind of the way I think in little, poetry is kind of those small moments, and I think it's how I kind of see things. I like to break things apart and analyze things. The types of shows I love, I like, the murder mysteries, how like the PBS murder mysteries, how like all the pieces fit together, and looking at the little pieces and how all the little pieces matter. And so I think it's just kind of naturally how I am. And I've tried to, in some of my other, in creative writing classes where I had to write short stories or write the beginning of a novel, and it's just I have a hard time thinking in the big picture, and but at the same time, I think my books kind of, all the poems sort of relate to each other in a big picture kind of way, but I think it has to happen in that piecemeal, because I don't know, I like to see how all the little pieces fit together instead of having it all set out in my head what that end is going to be.
So what are some of these little pieces that go into creating a poem?
A lot of times it's like, it might be like some of my poems are blends of my language and like my daughter's language, like the one I just read. And actually it's a poem, the italicized words are her words. And so I'll blend those together, or sometimes take influence from other poets, especially kind of had a recent interest in reading a lot of other war poets throughout history, not necessarily just all American either, just from all different countries, and writing about different conflicts. And so incorporating some of their words and citing them in my poetry, and permanent change of station. Some of the poems blend my language, my daughter's language, and words and phrases from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and from classic children's books, which seems like an odd combination, but what I was reading, I read children's books every day, and then The Art of War is what I was reading to kind of ground myself and get myself through that tough time after we had just recently made the big move and my daughter was confused. So I would read her a bedtime story, and then she would go to bed, and I would read from The Art of War, and my husband was gone quite a bit during that time too. So we were in this place where we didn't know anybody. My husband was gone at trainings, and The Art of War kind of grounded me. And then after I'd finished reading a section, I sit down and I write a poem, and the words just kind of started coming together. And in fact, the very first one that I wrote, that was a combination of a children's book, The Art of War, my language, and my daughter's language, was On Such Little Things Happiness Depends, the poem that I read earlier. It's the children's book that I draw from is Oscar Wilde's story of the Nightingale and the Rose. And then the section of, or chapter of, The Art of War that I draw from is The Use of Spies. And so that's the coyotes acting as spies. And
spies? Did you say the use of spies?
And it just seems so like, this seems so fitting with what I just read, is the story of the little nightingale that comes at night. And then I was like, and then I read the section on the use of spies, and I thought, well, it seems so fitting for a poem about night. And putting, I don't know, about spies and putting my daughter to bed. But I thought of all of the little creatures in the night, coming out, and instead of being something that was fearful, to be creatures that were coming to look after her, and make the night a safe place.
Well, what I'd like you to do is to share some more of your poetry, and maybe we'll hear the one about the night.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that was when I read That Was On Such Little Things Happiness Depends.
Okay. All right.
And, with the coyotes. But
yes.
I can read. This is one that is kind of about my daughter as a force of strength, and she is. She's feisty, and we're proud that she's feisty. She's little for her age, so we feel like she needs to have that fire inside her. And so this poem references that fire. It's called Daughter. We are raising fire, a shock-headed girl in this cold season. When you start a fire, be to windward. Wait for it to break out within. Mind now what I say. Remain quiet. For when fire breaks, we call these special days. Nothing to me is sweeter than a crackling flame.
A crackling flame.
Yeah. It's definitely.
Please read another.
Okay.
Or two.
All right. I feel like I should read one about my dog is also haven't read any about him, but he's a key player in Permanent Change of Station.
All right.
Because he was very much that stabilizing force. He kind of acts as our guard, our stabilizer, our consistency. We moved and everything changed, and even my husband left for training, and so he was that kind of familiar thing that we could lean on, and we leaned on him quite a bit. But so here's a poem that is for my dog Seamus. The Dog Dreams. After a while, when nothing happened, they began to get restless. Michael Bond, Paddington. In consequence of heavy rains, you must wait until it subsides. Lay down your body, small and furry. Close your eyes. You pass quickly over mountains. Keep company in the neighborhood of valleys. Wind your way through tangled thickets, hollow basins filled with reeds, woods thick with undergrowth. With each bound, birds rise in their flight. Startled beasts retreat. I run my hand along your side. Where are you going in such a hurry? Come home and stay. The sun is shining. And my dog, he's often a vocal dreamer, so I do imagine when he's dreaming that he is chasing little woodland critters.
All right. And what is his name?
His name is Seamus.
Seamus.
Named after
right.
Seamus, the Irish
yes,
poet.
Dr. Seamus. Yes. Well, hello, Seamus. Welcome to Quintessential Listening Poetry. Your mom is on the air. As you think about your work and your life, poets are from all over the world. Where do you hail from?
It's difficult to say. I think that's also one of my topics. It's difficult to identify home. But my home for the majority of my life was the Southwest, Nevada, Colorado, and Southern California. And so I'd say the Southwest is probably what I feel most connected to, and I find beauty in deserts, and that's where most of my family members are too. So that's another thing that makes it feel like my parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents. So, yeah. But currently, I live in Hampstead, North Carolina.
In North Carolina. Do you like North Carolina?
I do. It took a bit to get used to because, like I said, coming from the West, it's very different. Just landscape-wise, it's like, where are the mountains? It's so it's so flat here, but I think it just takes a bit to get used to. And I think another thing that when I first moved here, I was like, oh, why did we have to come to North Carolina? But I think most of it is I didn't know anybody yet. I had to meet people, and I think once you make friends, then the place starts to feel more homey.
But please share another piece of your work.
Okay. Just one in conversation with a war poet, and Henry Reed, who was a World War II poet. And I think his poem he's most known for is The Naming of Parts. Goes through that back and forth. He's listening to the details about a gun and how to put it together, and then he's going back and forth in between listening and observing nature. So this is kind of my ode to Henry Reed.
All right.
Henry Reed. The bees are at war with the flowers this morning, and so I think of you and wonder how to name the parts of my life. We call this building a home, but it isn't ours. Borrowed walls and roof, a place in between movement. And my husband has a billet, all the duties therewith. What's my assignment then? One who assembles all the dismantled parts seems too awkward a title. And there are friends, I name faraway friends, and friends whose names fade away after time. But these flowers are always gardenias. These always pansies, no matter the yard where bees drone their humdrum battle cries. And I think that poem is when I realized, it's kind of what we were talking about with home. I think that poem is, I started to feel like, that North Carolina was becoming a home that, I was seeing all the unfamiliar things, and finally started realizing all the things that are familiar, and there really isn't a whole lot of difference between place. You just have
there's a statement that home is where the heart is.
Exactly, yeah, and you just kind of, some responsibility is on us to make a place a home.
As you think about your poetry, all poets have several words that come up over and over again, words or sentences that they just can't help but use in their work. What are three of your absolute favorite words?
Oh, my goodness. I never really thought about that before, but I know that there has to be words that I use over and over again. I know war has to be, because I describe a lot of things as war. It's like the bees are at war with the flowers. So I know war comes up even when I'm not really talking about war. But, yeah. And that's really interesting. I never really... Wow. I'll have to think about that.
All right. Well, we're trained professionals here at Quintessential Listening Poetry, so we know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a special ritual that you go through when you're preparing to write? Is there any type of ritual that you do?
I think when I really sit down to write, like the initial, I like to have people around me, and sometimes I think my ritual used to be that I liked it completely quiet, and now I have to have some kind of, like, if my daughter's not up making noise in the background, I have to have some kind of, like, music playing, so sometimes I'll put music on, or I'll turn the TV on in the living room and have it kind of in the background as I'm working in the office. So I actually like to have some kind of noise. I think it makes it, for one thing, I think it makes it feel like not so of a isolated kind of project.
Well, let me ask this question. As you think about the poets that you enjoy, who are some of those poets again?
I love Kieran Carson. He's a Belfast poet, and he wrote a lot of poems, collections in the 80s, 70s, and 80s about the troubles in Belfast. And he just has, I mean, the way that he writes about conflict is so different than what I had encountered before. Is he has a poem, Belfast Confetti, and instead of a bombing has happened, but instead of describing it as a bombing, he describes it as sentences coming apart and colons and periods and asterisks flying everywhere, and all of the sentences have to be, the language has to be put back together, and I thought that was an interesting way to talk about something like that. So I really like him, and I discovered, I'd always thought that I didn't like Emily Dickinson until I read her as an adult and realized I really love Emily Dickinson, and I find her poetry to be much more complicated than I thought it was, and less about, less focused on death. Her poetry is actually a little bit more hopeful than, than I think some of her more known poems. But and I love Wisława Szymborska, who's a Polish poet. Rita Dove is, of course, a fantastic poet. So I just like writers from different walks of life. I like to read people from different countries. As I think it's interesting to see, like, how much we share, that we come from different walks of life, and sometimes not share, but just admire what other people have been through and things like that.
Well, share 3 more of your works.
Okay. Let's see. I think I will. I'll read another Seamus poem. This is, speaking of Emily Dickinson, it made me think of this poem. And this isn't in either one of my collections, but it's a newer one. Seamus and I meet the ghosts of Carlo and Emily Dickinson. And just a little side note, Carlo was one of Emily Dickinson's favorite dogs. So,
okay. All right.
So that's why I felt, and she has a poem, it's I started early, took my dog. And so it's about a poem about her walking her dog. And so that poem kind of inspired this one. And so Seamus and I are on our walk. Seamus and I meet the ghosts of Carlo and Emily Dickinson. On an early walk, tired, we stopped a bit to take a rest. Seamus sniffed dandelion greens and grass. I admired a robin skipping on a neighbor's lawn. And something made us turn our heads, look down the street. A woman all in white with a great brown dog. Not walking really, more like floating. Seamus and I knew right away. Emily and Carlo. The street became a sandy shore. The wind became the ocean's roar. Little dog barked a happy greeting. Good morning, I wish to the two. They halted there before us. Emily bent to pet my tiny dog. Such a lovely, nubby tail he has. Seamus wagged his nub in gratefulness. And just as strangely as they came, they left us, standing on the street again. So just a little something different, a little fanciful poem. And then this one is law. This is from Uniform. It enacted, as the president directs, a proper distribution of rank, a company, a detachment of order. Be it further enacted that all will pay the subsistence of flexibility at home, of birthdays and burials. Be it further enacted that corps of Marines, respective dependents, detached from time to time. Be it further enacted the same oath, the same rules, established and employed, the same allowance. Be it further enacted into service of who you are and will be in debt and contract. Be it further enacted by these actions at any time liable to duty in the garrisons or on any shore. Come along from permanent change of station. Sunny spots can be abandoned, but I know it's hard to stir forth an insubordination of natural tendencies, a disorganization like the rustling of wings as the bird hurls itself against a storm, flies a great distance over the hills to somewhere, to accessible ground. Reoccupy.
How has your idea of what poetry is and what poetry can do changed since you began writing poetry?
I think, I'd always visioned poetry as being a very, my idea of poetry was always traditional poetry.
Okay.
And I think because of that's what I learned school was, kind of the canon of poets, who write in a very traditional sort of way. And so I think my idea with poetry now, like, as I became more widely read and as I started writing more and more on my own, just trying different forms, sometimes pantoum, sonnets, and that a sonnet doesn't always have to be the strict rules of a sonnet. It can have just that main structure of that, the questioning at the beginning, and then the turn, the volta, to turn the poem on itself. That's really the most important thing about a sonnet. It really isn't necessarily the iambic pentameter. Although it's a fun challenge to try to write an iambic pentameter. A sonnet doesn't have to be that, and playing with language and structure and creating my own structures. I think that has been really interesting in thinking about how structure and form connect to meaning, and how the vehicle of the poem is just as important, that you need to have the appropriate form to carry that certain feeling. So I definitely pay attention to that a lot more, and kind of sometimes I'll stick with traditional form, and sometimes I will stray from that and do my own sort of thing.
Right. Well, let's take a brief break, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Lisa Stice. My name is Michael Anthony Ingram. I'd like to welcome you to Quintessential Listening Poetry. I'm here tonight with Lisa Stice. Lisa, what do you do as being the role of a poet in modern-day society?
Oh, my goodness. I try to make I think the most important thing about poetry is, communicating feelings and building connections between people. And so I think the most important thing is to move beyond just the page and try to make connections with other poets. I love reading journals, and so, I'll sometimes comment on poems if that option is available, follow poets on Twitter, Facebook, read their writing, write reviews, either formal reviews or just reviews on Goodreads. I think, it's our responsibility to, if we want poetry to be read by other people, I think poets need to kind of foster each other and support each other as best we can, because we want it to get out beyond the poet world. And so we have to begin with a strong poet community for that to happen. And we can't expect other people to read it if we don't read it and promote it ourselves. So I think reading as much as I can, promoting as many poets as I can, the ones that I love and want to share with other people. I don't want to keep those secret. I want to get them out there in the world.
Well, let me ask this question. You've had an opportunity to publish 2 collections. What advice would you give to an aspiring poet?
I would say don't be afraid to submit your work. Everybody's going to get rejections, and I think some people get afraid of rejections. In fact, I used to teach high school, and one of my former students, writing poetry, wanted to submit, asked me about some journals, and he submitted to a couple and got rejections, and then was like, I don't think I want to submit anymore. And I was like, you know what? I get, you get many more rejections because it's not necessarily that your poetry isn't good. It's not just a right fit for that journal or that particular issue, or, sometimes it's you didn't do your own research and read the issue before you submitted, and make sure that your poetry is a good fit. Sometimes there just isn't enough space. You know, it is a good fit, it is a good poem, but there isn't enough space, so some better poems made it. But you can rework that poem or send it off to a journal that is a better fit, and just keep trying. And once I found once I started submitting, too, it's like then I find out about other journals that are similar to ones that I've published in, and send to those, and you get more of that sort of understanding of how that process works. It becomes easier and less scary, and you know, you'll never get published if you don't submit. So my advice is just submit and keep submitting until you.
Do you have a favorite poem of your? Well, do you have a favorite poem in your collection?
My favorite poem is probably, oh my gosh, it's probably from Uniform, I'd say. There's, in another interview, I was asked what I would want to happen with my poetry 100 years from now, and I wanted this poem to be read in high school anthologies, literary anthologies, or textbooks, and I wanted the kids to complain about it, and then come back to it later and realize that it was, you know, that it was something that they could relate to and understand it then. It was kind of like my experience that I had with Emily Dickinson, and that's what I wanted for this poem, and it's, would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
It's Brides and Grooms. This life will mold you flat, shove you into tiny spaces, carved from tradition, extra medals and ranks with earrings and bracelets, side by side at balls, holiday parties, side by side through moto speeches, packing and unpacking suitcases, boxes. Some boxes never unpacked. But there's this. You are meant to be at odds. The pretty good, hang on to that. When this life is over, you'll want that person again. The good enough, the real.
Powerful. I'd scratch my head over that one, too, so I'd have to come back to it many times.
Thanks.
I'd be exactly the kind of student that you'd want. Exactly.
Oh,
Let me ask you a question. Okay,
yes.
Please continue.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. You know, we're made from our experiences. Who are you as a result of writing poetry?
I think I'm a much better observer. I think that poetry has actually made me a much better listener and I think that poetry has helped me to know how to empathize, because you know, it's like we don't always necessarily share the same experiences, but being able to feel what somebody else is feeling, I think, is really an important thing, and I think that poetry has helped me do that, and you know, and do it outside of poetry, you know, things that might be on the news or something, to feel what other people might be going through.
Lisa?
Oh, yes.
All right. The phone went out for a minute, so I didn't get an opportunity to hear what you said.
Oh, no. I was just saying that poetry, I think, has helped me empathize, feel what other people are feeling, you know.
All right.
their writing or through, their telling of their experiences.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, we need to close. It's been an incredible hour with you. Let me ask this one last question that I ask every time that I have an opportunity to interview someone. When people hear your work, they usually want more. What's next for you as a poet?
Well, hopefully my poems in conversation with other poets of conflict will make its way out into the world, I'm hoping. And I've also started writing some poems in conversation with female writers who have kind of been forgotten. Their books are out of print, poets, fiction writers, journalists, or they were the spouses or sisters or daughters of famous male poets, and their male family member or spouse was extremely well known, and even some of them part of the canon, and the women were the lesser known, and so those poems are in conversation with them and kind of spotlight that I think that they deserve. And hopefully their books will come out of print sometime, I don't know. But
right. Well, Lisa, we'd like to thank you for sharing your work with us tonight. If I wanted to purchase either of your collections, where would I go?
You can, for Uniform, you can purchase it on Amazon or now on the Kelsey Books website, as Aldrich Press is an imprint of Kelsey Books. So that bookstore was just recently created. So either of those two places. And then Permanent Change of Station can be purchased on Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com. And in some bookstores, small bookstores.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Lisa. Please, hopefully you'll return to Quintessential Listening Poetry. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ingram.
Oh, yes. Well, have a great evening, and good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right.